And after quite a long time, welcome back to Ziggurat. I'm still annihilated and you join me in quite a moment of indecision. The weapon we pick up here should be familiar to anyone who ever played Hexen. It's the Serpent Staff, the second weapon, I believe, of the cleric class in that game. It works fairly similarly to how it did in that game. It fires two projectiles that move in a weird swirly pattern. Such pattern is sadly rather less than helpful here because we're fighting lost souls, an enemy transplanted wholesale from Doom. Think about lost souls, they charge at you in a straight line. The Serpent Staff is not good at straight lines. Hence me switching weapons and fighting fire with fire, or rather skulls with skulls. There's actually an achievement for that. Anyway, I go back to the Serpent Staff very quickly because it's actually fairly powerful at dealing with slow-moving enemies like those golems there. One of the reasons for this is it inflicts poison, which... Okay, I realized that I'd said some bad words about poison in the first video, and that was really mostly aimed at the weapon I had at that time. Poison is great if you have a means of inflicting it safely and from a distance. Simply because it allows you to switch your targets a bit earlier. On the other hand, this is kind of wonky because there is no good indication of how much health the enemy still has. Sure, your crosshair does change color in accordance to that, but honestly, in combat as chaotic as the one in Ziggurat, you really don't have the time to watch that. Right here and right now we can actually see an effect what I mentioned earlier about how the wand really falls off as a weapon. Even with the character who specializes in its use and who should in theory have the most powerful wand in the game, which by the way isn't true, but that's something for later. At this point it takes way too long to kill just about any enemy with it for it to be seriously worth using. Oh, speaking of worth using, the modifier we have here is one of the joke ones. Next gen was put in one of the earlier versions of Ziggurat, and what it does is simulate a 3D effect, you know, by splattering green and red blobs that are theoretically supposed to make sense if you put in some sort of special glasses on your screen. Now, I wouldn't really blame you if you hadn't noticed anything special about that room. Thing is, when the next-gen filter was originally introduced, it was a whole lot more distinctive. So distinctive, in fact, it rendered the rooms essentially unplayable. Thankfully, it has been toned down since, so it has become much less of an eyesore and, more importantly, much less of a player killer. Now, a brief aside, as I was jumping around like an idiot, and I'm about to start to do so again. I mentioned before that skeletons are complete chumps, and that is true for the normal skeletons. These ones, however, wear armor. The upgrade is fairly obvious, they throw 3 axes instead of 1, and this would not really be a problem if they had the decency to show up in numbers capped at, I don't know, 3 or 4, but they usually come up in bands of 6 to 8. And that's a whole lot of axes. Still, nothing that a liberal application of exploding skulls can't solve, right? Another new modifier, behemoths, bigger enemies. This one is a joy because it just means the enemies are easier to hit on the other... Holy shit, those Ziggurat are scary. Okay, this time it's not just Ziggurat. They come paired with what is probably my least favorite enemy in the game. Forget, if you can, considering their giant size, the numbers and the fact that they're trying to eat my face, the Ziggurat, and look at the guy behind them. These are shamans. They are a pain in the ass. They have 2 attacks, one of them is summoning Ziggurat. That's why I'm not getting any experience for my extreme gardening. The other is homing bots. Yup, in a game that's completely focused on health and ammo economy, they decided to have an enemy with homing bullets. Really, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing worse than a room with shamans. Oh, and if you noticed, I said that the behemoth modifier is normally good for you. This is the one case where it isn't, because the carrots block the access to the shaman much more effectively. Anyway, the only thing worse than a room with shamans is a room with obelisks that spawn shamans. Shamans? Shaman? Christ, I had this problem with Shadow Warrior too. Now this obelisk room presents another new challenge, those cute little flying turtle things. They are called storm beasts, and they are one of the more dangerous enemies in the game, not because they are particularly aggressive or intimidating, they're not, they just float around, mind their own business, and occasionally spit a ball of lightning at you. It's because, well, as I believe, someone screwed up numerically. Said balls of lightning have a much bigger area of impact than their animation actually shows, which means a lot of the time you will get hit, even when you really shouldn't on account of having dodged. This is especially annoying if you're playing a slower character, because there are at least 2 characters in the game that without perks have basically no way of avoiding those explosions. Also pictured within this room why we hate lava pits. I don't make a big deal of it right here because I'm at full health, but if that was experience or ammo as opposed to health potions, I would be pissed. Now, one thing I believe I haven't talked about yet was the fact that the last storm beast we killed had a custom paint job of sorts. During your travels through the Ziggurat, you will occasionally encounter monsters that suffer from the same symptoms. They come in 3 different colors, red, green and blue, and it means they are mini-bosses of sorts. I believe the official name for this is champions, and the colors signify what kind of champion they are. The red monsters inflict way too much damage, the blue monsters take way too much damage, and the green monsters move so fast it doesn't fucking matter because you're not gonna hit them anyway. There is also a 4th special kind of champion, and that's monsters that go invisible for a period of time. Sadly, they aren't color-coded, so you cannot see them for what they are until they actually go invisible. Then you can't see them at all, but at least you know they are there. Now, the battle we are in right now is a pretty good illustration of how the random factors in Ziggurat determine the difficulty of the room. We have obelisks. Obelisks spawn monsters. That's normally fairly easy to handle, except in this time they spawn green slimes. Green slimes spawn yellow slimes when they die. So we have this 2-level reinforcement plan, and it's making it really difficult to clear up properly. In order to beat the room, you need to kill the obelisks, the green slimes and the yellow slimes, in that order, all that while everything I've just named is firing at you. Well, except the obelisks, that would be silly. Now, in order to make this even more fun, the room decides to throw in a couple of ice golems. Ice golems are normally a very friendly enemy. They are slow, they don't have that much health, and their firing pattern is very easily predictable and avoidable. However, when they die, they turn into fire golems. Those fuckers are small, fast, melee, and explosive. Really, the only thing this room is missing is shamans. You know, I'm pretty fine with enemies that spawn enemies and enemies that fall apart into other enemies, but when you have enemies that spawn enemies and fall apart into other enemies, that becomes a bit too much. On the other hand, I think it's a pretty good, let's say, testament to how Ziggurat plays, that even in a fight as absurdly as set up as this, you can actually succeed, and your weapons still feel like they're making enough of an impact. Yes, it takes forever and a half to whittle them all down, but you're doing it, you're working on it, you are making progress. Speaking of progress, squad damage, the most brutal modifier in the game. I love it, I wish there was an option to play the entire game with it on. But holy shit, can it end a lot of runs. This case isn't that bad because we have mostly imps and I got pretty good at jumping over fires. But a room with fragility on and say storm beasts and shamans is basically just telling you to kiss your run goodbye. Here I'd also like to draw your attention to the shockwaves I've been emitting periodically when I'm getting hit that keep slowing all those carrots. That's the revenge perk and it's amazing. Just in this room I believe it saved my life at least 3 times, considering for how much these fuckers hit for. It also provides a fairly nice link to another topic I'd like to talk about here, and that's the way Ziggurat treats status ailments, which is interesting to say the least. The description of the revenge perk says that it projects shockwaves that stun enemies. Stun in this game doesn't stun, it slows them. The effect most other games would consider stun is called freeze, which again in most other games would slow the enemy. It's actually kind of interesting to think about where this whole ice equals slow in games came from. I blame Blizzard and Diablo 2, but it's probably older. The temple room we're just done with I'd rate as fairly decent. I mean, nothing that special, but that level up was nice, and at least we didn't get any kind of crippling divine punishment. Or got all my weapons taken from me, which can happen too. Now here's a pretty rare sight, skeletons on floor 3. Totally not complaining. What I'm going to be complaining about is the source of these fucking carrots, because again they don't give experience. Which means there's a shaman around, and then you look up and see that fucking golden rain slowly descending on you. I said before that these projectiles home in, and it's not completely true, they don't home in that in a way that they'd follow you around corners and shit, but they do track you. Thankfully they're pretty slow. The best way to avoid them that I found, obviously permitting the room layout, is that make sure you're under them, because they don't really steer too well vertically, and if you can spot them going towards you, you can just run under the projectiles and then they'll end harmlessly in the ground. Of course, while you're doing that, the ground is probably going to be covered in carnivorous carrots, but, you know, risks of the trade. I am really not sure what led to the inclusion of the carrots in this game, and I'd honestly be pretty interested in hearing that explanation, because otherwise the game isn't portrayed as particularly funny or comedic. They're just completely random. They come out of the left field and never... I don't know. Screw carrots. Here we're fighting knights. Knights kind of suffer from the storm beast syndrome in that they'll be hitting you a lot of time when you're convinced that they shouldn't, but in this case it's because their projectiles arc and they usually go over you, so you don't actually see the impact radius. They also have a second attack, which is a classic platformer shockwave. Yes, you have to jump over it. Another fairly interesting thing about them is that they track targets very badly. Either that or it's their attack animation being really slow, but most of the time you will see their skulls completely misfire if you keep moving, and you should always keep moving. The real problem is moving in a pattern that doesn't get you to the place where the skull is going to land on another lap or while dodging another attack. On their own, they're pretty much harmless. Oh yeah, I said skulls. I'm honestly not sure about whether the projectile they're fighting is a flaming skull or just another fireball, but this game likes flaming skulls a lot. It likes it to the point of sometimes the style being comparable to the cover of a metal album, except, you know, Wergarots. Which would be a pretty good band name, now that I think of it. I should probably start talking about what's actually happening in the game at some point. So here we go. All the rooms are connected by those little passages, and the passages that have book stacks in them are a small blessing. Simply because the various destructibles like book stacks occasionally contain goodies. There are also perks that reward you for destroying, well, destructibles. But enough of that, for we are summoning... Oh, it's Percival. Hello, Percival. This guy is a pretty good representation of his enemy class, because just about everything I said about knights works for him on the double. He's one of the easiest bosses in the game, mostly because he doesn't really summon, and his attack is fairly easily avoided. The only thing you need to watch out is the large AoE. Really, the easiest way to get killed against Percival is your own stupidity, because you have to take the fact that the projectiles are slow and the explosions stay around for a while into your movement planning and not run, say, back and forth or in very small circles. As long as you pay a bit of attention about where you were and where are you running, he'll pretty much just scratch you. And that was floor 3. One thing I really like about this game is that how each of the floors has its very own and very distinctive style. For example, the 3rd floor was a very gothic cursed cathedral. Now we are entering into the 4th floor, which is the cursed cathedral. Yeah, I lied. Floor 3 and 4 are the same. Floor 4, however, is where the actual level starts being a lot more vengeful. Remember what I said about the little passages connecting the rooms, that you can use them to recover and rest and generally chill out? Well, now there's traps in them. Speaking of chill, we just found out our first alchemy weapon, and I'm not very enthusiastic about it. The frostbow is, in my opinion, the worst alchemy item. It's not bad, it's perfectly serviceable for what it does, and that's deliver a decent amount of damage in a small projectile, tiny rate of fire, and a very awkward firing arc. My issues with it are twofold. One, it's boring, and two, it doesn't really do what an alchemist class weapon should do, because most of those are room clearers with giant area effects. Frostbow is effectively a spell that's needlessly complicated to aim. Okay, so not all of the passages are trapped. Some barrels are though. That green goop is very harmful. As is the thing standing in it. That is a demon, an exclusively late game enemy that shows up only on floors 4 and 5. Here they are paired with banshees, so you can see that their firing patterns are a lot similar, except the demon fires about 4 times as fast. I still haven't found out a consistent way of dodging their projectiles. If you run into these guys, you will get hurt. Thankfully, they usually only show up in small numbers, and it tends to be easy to pick them out of a crowd and destroy with priority. The reasons why I didn't go for this are two. A, I am horrible at dodging banshees, and so I decided that all-out offensive would be better than trying to avoid projectiles I can't avoid anyway, and B, I don't really have any weapons capable of doing this efficiently. Mostly on account of being stuck with the fucking frostbow in my alchemy slot. Okay, infirmary. This is an basically easy mode modifier. There's nothing to it, and workers are plenty weak on their own, so I decided to use it to show off the frostbow, and well, it sucks. Then I got cornered and had to switch to an actual weapon. Thanks, frostbow. Admittedly, one of the reasons why I failed at making the most disgusting frost vegetable pack possible was the fact that I was trying to use the secondary fire of the frostbow. Secondary fires are present on all weapons, but at most of them they are not very good. What they usually do is basically the primary fire shoots the projectile once and the secondary makes 2 or 3 copies of it. The secondary fires eat more mana, obviously, but that's not the real issue. The real problem is that they take forever to reload. And this game has no reload animations. This is probably my single worst problem with the whole shooting engine thing here. I imagine a lot of people think that reloading animations are simply something cosmetic, that they are there for the weapons to look and feel better. It is not so, and it is very much not so in a game that's as dependent on timing as Ziggurat. The reloading animation is there, so you can tell how long is it going to take before you're able to fire again. So you can, again, adapt your movement, line up your targets and all that. When you don't have them, such as in Ziggurat, you're just stuck not knowing where to aim, when to dodge, how long you have until you're able to use your gun again. I've played a lot of first-person shooters in my life, and this uncertainty is something horrible. Especially when you consider that you had reloading animations as far back as fucking Doom. Oh, a small aside on a fairly interesting enemy. The flying fish that fire a line of projectiles are called beholders. They're, well, flying fish with an eye inside of their mouth. I find their design creepy and cute at the same time. I like them a lot, but honestly, I'm not really sure why the game sticks them in such a late level, because the lesson they teach is very simple. You can't dodge to the front or back, the line will kill you. You need to dodge to the side, but thing is, you've probably been sidestepping since the very beginning. Now, if they were, for example, capable of leading their shots, as opposed to firing always at right wherever you're standing, that would make for an interesting enemy that can cut off your venues of escape and limit your movement severely, but as it is, they are not very threatening. Now remember that little spiel I had about obelisks and enemy spawning enemies earlier? Well, this is why I had it. Obelisks spawning shamans. Shamans spawning carrots. Golden death from the skies. Crimson beefy death on the ground. From the length of the video, you can probably tell that this run did not end up well, and this room is the reason why. You need to deal with the enemies in a particular order, and they are going to try their damn best at not letting you. I am purely on the defensive. I'm waiting until I can get a shot at the obelisks, in order to have a shot at the shamans, in order to have a shot at the carrots. Homing weapons are useless because they tend to track what's closest to me, which will inevitably be a carrot. I could solve this with a good alchemic room cleaner, but I'm stuck with the frostbow. As it is, the best thing I have access to is still the serpent staff, not only because it's decently powerful and rapid fire, but also because the poison effect actually kind of helps with whenever I can sneak a projectile past the wall of carrots to hurt something that actually matters. And after the final obelisk dies, a couple of plants spawn, which means I need to switch up my weapons yet again, because serpent staff isn't very good about those. In order to kill one of these, you need to do burst damage hard and fast, because they only stay open for a little while. So back to a frostbow it is, and these projectiles actually do track. Then it's only a matter of a little carrot cleanup. But when I end up with this room, I might as well be dead, because there isn't even really anything I can do backtracking wise. I have 34 health and the floor has been picked clean. So the only thing I can do is to summon a boss. Thing is, 4th floor has 2 possible bosses and I can't beat either of those without taking damage. So this is going to be interesting to say the least. But on the video I don't realize that yet, so I'm still looking for rooms that can contain possible pickups. I find a scroll room, which would normally be great because it's free experience, but yeah, they don't usually contain anything either. And then there's a fight. The thing that managed to save me in this battle is the room layout. It's all long distance fighting and I have a homing weapon, which means I can generally just shoot a skull, forget about it and go hide from whatever is flying at me. As long as I can keep dishing out damage to keep at least one side of the room clear and making sure nothing spawns behind me, I can deal with this fairly easily. The fact that most of the room is a large flat plane helps too, because it means the storm beast projectiles will explode when they hit the walls, and I am keeping well away from those. Especially when I think they are about to fire, hence me zigzagging around like an idiot. It's an attempt to coax them into sending their projectiles down the hall as opposed to hitting the walls. And then I run out of staff ammo. Thankfully we are crass, so the wand will do in a pinch, but it's not something I want to be using for a long time, from fear of losing the damage race. So, god, I hate this weapon. What follows is a brief moment of hope. I still left some pickups somewhere in the room, because I noticed at least 3 golems spawning on that side, and I don't really want to tackle them with the frostbow. So we go back to the wand. Kraz's wand actually disposes of the small golems very well. The real problem is that using it on the big ones takes way too long and gives them way too much of an opportunity to actually hit you, because you need to keep it pointed at them for the whole time. Also, a perfect picture of golem dickery. I think I talked about this before, but golems have a really great way of annoying you by the fact that the experience is dropped by the big one and the ammo is dropped by the small ones, but the small ones are bound to chase you away from the experience. I do end this fight in a much better shape than I started it, and I'm actually thinking I stand a chance against the boss, whichever one it may be, with 96 health. Sadly, it's the harder one. Ignace is probably my least favorite boss in the game. That's because there is not much to fighting him. There's no finesse, there's very little dodging because everything he has an enormous AoE and sets the floor on fire. What his fight is a straight up damage race, and I'm not the best equipped for that at the moment. For Ignace you pretty much need a good weapon with an area of effect, because you can't afford to focus either on him or his buddies. You need to hit them all at the same time in order to stay in the battle. That is simply because one way or another you are taking damage the entire time you are in this room. And then, well, you die. This final sequence, I think, really shows how bumpy Ziggurat can be. I went from almost dead to fine to completely dead during the course of 3 rooms. It's exciting, it's also frustrating, sure, but hey, still a roguelike.